Hey friends, welcome back to Movies in a Bottle, where we're breaking down Porco Rosso. Did you know that in 1992, Shigeru Miyamoto, the guy that created Super Mario, had an interview with this movie's director, Hayao Miyazaki? Or did you know that this movie started off originally as an approximately 30-minute film for Japanese airlines? Well, I've always thought of this as one of my top 3 Ghibli movies since I saw it, and I recently learned that, as well as plenty of other trivia that I'm going to share along the way. And quick note, I think they crushed the English dub, so I'm mostly covering that version, except for a couple of details I'm going to touch on from the original Japanese version. But with all that being said, remember to subscribe and let's roll film. This story takes place in the Mediterranean Sea, in an age where seaplanes ruled the waves. It tells the tale of a valiant pig who fought against pirates for his pride, for his lover, and for his fortune. The name of our hero in this story is the Crimson Pig. Porco Rosso is Italian for the Crimson Pig, which is the official name of the movie if you translate it from its original Japanese. We pick up with said hero, Porco Rosso, while he's enjoying the beautiful weather and the crackling radio at his idyllic beach hideout. But his peace is interrupted by a phone call from a man saying that the pirate gang, the Mamautos, are raiding their ship carrying gold, and they've taken some little girls on a field trip hostage too. Before Porco can negotiate a higher rate, he's reminded of his contract and he fires up his old engine and sets off on his daring rescue. During the exchange, we see a sort of honor amongst thieves dynamic because the line between being a pirate and a mercenary is pretty thin. The pirates are kind to their hostages, and then Porco gives them a chance to surrender before he carefully takes out one of their engines and maneuvers in such a way that the pirates end up actually shooting down their own seaplane. Porco then finishes his rescue, and then he even leaves the Mama Autos some money for repairs. Speaking of, Porco's old engine is well overdue for a tune-up of his own, since it barely held together long enough to get the job done. In that interview between Miyamoto and Miyazaki said that he was worried about the ending because he didn't have a script for this movie and he wasn't expressing a particular cause or message, which I don't think is entirely true. But he also said that he watched this movie when it was animated before it had sound and went back and forth between thinking it was terrible and not so bad. But we'll check in with his interview one more time, but let's keep rolling to see if he was right to be worried about the ending. The pirates all across the Adriatic Sea are getting so fed up with Porco that they've been forced to come together to find a way to deal with him. Tonight they're meeting at the Hotel Adriano to introduce their new competition for Porco. He's an Italian-American named Curtis who's supposedly a match for the ace pilot. But before the pirates and Curtis can bicker further about getting a fair price for the job, they're interrupted by the owner and the operator of the hotel, Gina, who sings a beautiful song to all her patrons. Porco is also flown into the Hotel Adriano to visit his old friend Gina, but don't worry, it's a neutral zone like the Continental. Porco's fated rival Curtis slides up as the song ends, and to no one's surprise, the American is more of a pig than Porco, but they both agree that Gina is stunning. They're already familiar with each other by reputation alone, and Porco even recognized Curtis's ship, the Rattlesnake. Curtis drops a subtle threat whenever he says that even though he's won the prestigious Snyder Cup 2 years in a row, he's actually best at aerial combat. Porco warns Curtis about dealing with pirates, but before any of them can get upset, Gina is there to remind them of the rules. Porco then heads upstairs while Gina declines Curtis's spontaneous marriage proposal. Gina finds Porco eating alone and then tells him what she told Curtis to decline his offer. Of the pilots she's married, one died in combat, one died in the Atlantic, and after a pause, she said that the last died in Asia, which is her way of letting Porco know that she's recently been giving the heartbreaking news that they've been waiting this whole time for about her last husband. After 3 years, Gina's just grown numb to the pain, but she does thank Porco for all that he's done during this time. Porco plays it cool, of course, and says that it's a nice place, except for that picture of him on the wall. Gina still can't believe he scribbled out his face since it's the last photo of him still as a human, but she keeps it up anyways. Then she ends the night wondering how they're gonna break Porco's curse while he stays up thinking about his new rival. And quick note, Gina never calls him Porco, she calls him Marco instead. There are many interpretations for how Porco became a pig, but Miyazaki has purportedly said that Porco and Gina were once in love until war broke out in his country, and he had to choose between Gina and his country, and he chose his country. However, after witnessing the death of his fellow pilots, including his best friend and the guy that Gina went on to marry, he began to second-guess his actions, and after he failed to resolve the conflicts in his mind, he became a pig. Porco heads into the city where he's operating in a bit of a gray area since mercenary work isn't quite illegal, but changing political landscapes will likely be outlawing it soon. Porco quickly does his business, paying off loans, getting some cash, and trying to get ammo and supplies for that tune-up. Meanwhile, the recently allied pirate gangs attack yet another passenger ship, and thanks to Curtis, they make short work of the security. Then just as Porco is throwing in the towel on repairing his own ship, he hears the pirate organization challenging him publicly. Knowing he doesn't have time to rest, he heads to Milan to get a top-notch mechanic. This is a good time to mention that this movie has some of the most beautiful landscapes in all of animation, so do yourself a favor and check it out. Living up to his name and continuing on his hot streak, Curtis spots Porco's iconic red plane on his way to Milan, and the Texan politely challenges him to a one-on-one match to settle things now. Porco declines because his ship is in no state, but Curtis isn't taking no for an answer, and their dogfight ensues anyways. The Crimson Pig does whatever maneuvering he can, but he's shot down after his engine stalls at the worst time. Curtis celebrates after defeating his rival and collects some red debris as proof and takes off. But Porco actually used the time while Curtis was searching to hide himself and what was left of his plane. Gina was so upset about hearing the news of Porco that she tried to go out looking for him in her boat right away, but thankfully Porco called in the nick of time. However, her relief is short-lived whenever he tells her that he's going to Italy, where they know it's not a legal gray area, they just have a warrant for his arrest. He says to let Curtis know that they'll be seeing each other again, but she begs him to stay out of danger because she can't bear to go to another pilot's funeral. Then she becomes incensed after he says sorry, but he's gotta fly. Like I said earlier, there's a handful of differences between the English dub and sub, and here's one that seems to irk people. In the English version, he says, "Sorry, baby, gotta fly," which seems pretty surface level. And in the Japanese version, he says, "A pig's gotta fly," which feels like a commentary on human nature and a cheeky little nod to the expression, "when pigs fly." As Porco is sneaking his wrecked plane around, he reads in the paper how the world isn't sure if he's alive or dead, but his good friend and mechanic Piccolo over in Milan knew better and waited up for him all night. But when Porco gets there, he's surprised that a new girl is doing all the work instead of Piccolo's sons. The two go about discussing repairs, and there's what seems like an Easter egg when Ghibli is on Porco's new engine, but Ghibli is a nickname of a real plane called the Caproni CA309 Ghibli. This is also where the Ghibli vs. Ghibli pronunciation thing started because the engine is usually called Ghibli, but over in Japan it's often pronounced Ghibli. But anyways, even though this new girl, Fio, is Piccolo's granddaughter from America and he even says she's more capable than his sons, Porco still doesn't trust her with his plane. Fio notices him starting to leave and directly asks him if he's got a problem with her doing this work because she's a girl or if it's because she's too young. It's both actually, but she only asks Porco what makes a great pilot, and he says intuition. In the original work he says inspiration, and while I like both answers, I like the original more because to me inspiration feels like it can truly strike anyone. But regardless, she knew he wouldn't say it takes experience, and it turns out that Fio is 17, the same age that Porco was whenever he learned that he was a gifted pilot. Then she really proves how confident she is in herself whenever she says that the whole job will be free if she can't do it, and Piccolo doesn't seem worried whatsoever. Porco sleeps on it, but the next morning he's surprised to see that Fio's been up all night working on the plans. She finds the plane's design incredibly unique, and Porco says that it's the only one of its kind because it was deemed too dangerous. He approves all of her proposed changes with only a slight modification, and then she becomes ecstatic after Porco confirms that means he's gonna let her be his new mechanic, so long as she doesn't stay up all night anymore, because he's a good dude. It's definitely a good thing that Porco came to terms with women working on his beloved plane because Piccolo has some more news for his old friend. All of his male relatives had to move elsewhere for work, so his new crew consists entirely of women of all ages from his extended family. Porco was still skeptical, but after a tender moment of prayer led by Piccolo, who is grateful for the desperately needed business, they all enjoy a meal together before they get to work. All of the ladies get to work, and they are firing on all cylinders, operating like a well-oiled machine. Fio continues to improve the design as they build, and even though it's pushing Porco way over budget, he basically tells her to go crazy and do whatever she thinks is best. Mr. Porco Rosso leaves the workshop to go catch a movie when another buddy of his, Ferrari, sits next to him so they can talk discreetly. Porco is warned that the secret police are aware that he's here, and if he's caught, they won't be giving him a trial. But he says on the other hand, they could work something out if he were to come back and be a pilot for Italy. Then Porco absolutely drops the mic, saying, "I'd rather be a pig than a fascist." Fio sees Porco while he's out and about, and she offers him a ride home and gives him the good news that she's borrowed this truck so that they can test his plane tomorrow. But Porco doesn't have time because the fascist police are already tailing him. He says we were followed in English, but in the Japanese audio he blames Fio for being followed, which aligns with her body language much better because she points at herself with a surprised look. But Porco deals with this every time he comes to Milan, so he does an impressive 180 drift to lose his pursuers. The police are not so secretly watching the workshop, so Porco has to try and sneak away, but he's shocked whenever he sees all the ladies prepping Fio for the flight. She insists on going because she's the engineer and she's responsible for this plane now, and they haven't even tested it. Then Porco moves from being shocked to dumbfounded whenever Piccolo even allows her to undertake this dangerous journey. I guess it's decided. Fio goes about taking out a gun to make space for herself, and she explains the plan that if they're caught, everyone will say that she was a hostage, so she isn't incriminated for helping. They burst out of the workshop while everyone screams "Kidnapper" at Porco, and now the two have to figure out how to get airborne. The pig can hardly maintain control over the souped up plane, let alone take off, but he has to figure something out before they miss an oncoming boat. Then with Fio's guidance, he misses that boat and regains control so they can finally escape into the clouds. Fio is taking in the astonishing view from the sky, and they spot another plane closing in, and it turns out to be Porco's friend Ferrari, who warns them of a trap up ahead. They follow his lead and make it out of Italy safely, and when they part part ways, Ferrari gives his friend a little bit of a hard time, saying that he's babysitting. They drop the ball again on the translation here because in the original Japanese version, Ferrari says, "pearls before swine," which is pretty clever because it's a saying that means you're wasting your time helping someone who won't appreciate or understand it. You could probably infer that they're really good friends if he's giving him a hard time like that. Curtis is still head over heels for Gina, so he snuck into her private garden to try and romance her with a letter that's inviting him to Hollywood. He has big aspirations in Hollywood, then politics after, but she isn't interested because she already has a bet going on with herself. If a certain someone who's not Curtis were to visit her in this garden, she knows they'd fall in love. As she explains that the certain someone never comes during the day and never goes into the garden either, Porco soars past the two of them. Curtis is surprised to see that he's still alive, but Porco is there to say hi to Gina with aerobatics so legendary that she remembers the first time that he ever took her flying. Curtis is appalled after it becomes clear that Porco is that certain someone, and Gina says it's because love is different here in the Adriatic. They don't fall in love all the time here. Then she wishes him luck in Hollywood as she leaves. Behind the scenes, Susan Egan said that she particularly likes voicing characters from Japanese animation because she feels like they're more complex. And she had a pretty funny observation in the voice acting booth saying that this movie takes place in Italy, was originally in Japanese, but now she's localizing it in English, but her character sings in French. Now that's talent. And while we're on the subject, Cary Elwes plays Curtis, who's an English guy voicing a dude with a Texan accent. Fio and Porco have to stop to refuel, but a shopkeeper gives the pig some bad news. The pirates have made a deal with the government, so he's out of a job. Then another funny translation happens that disjoints the body language again. In the shop, someone asks Porco for some smokes, and Porco gives him a pack. The guy doesn't ask for them in the English version, so Porco just randomly throws the dude a pack of smokes for no reason. On the way back to Porco's hideout, Fio wants to know when they're going to rematch Curtis, but given the recent news about Porco being out of a job, he's no longer interested. They finally get back to his hideout, which is based on Staneva Beach, a real beach on Vis Island in Croatia, but instead of getting a moment to rest, the Mama Auto pirates burst out of the tent ambushing them. They immediately move to smash Porco's pretty red plane for revenge, but it's Fio that stops them after Porco tells everyone that she's a world-class mechanic. She moves the hearts of the pirates by telling them the things that Piccolo used to tell her about seaplane pilots. They are the most honorable fighters of all because they're purified by both air and sea, braver than any pilot in the sky and mightier than any sailor in the sea. The pirates just can't find it in themselves to smash Fio's hard work, but they still want revenge on the pig, so they move to make some bacon. Fio again comes to the rescue, saying they can't hurt him because Porco exemplifies the honorable behavior of a true seaplane pilot because he came back to challenge Curtis one-on-one. So if there's anyone who wants to take out Porco, they should do it in the sky the same way. The pirates know better and know that only Curtis is a match for Porco, but the problem with that is his contract just ended. As they groan about their unfortunate situation, Curtis surprises everyone with a grand entrance. He followed the pirates since he knew they'd be getting into trouble, but while he was hiding, he overheard the little white lie Fio told to save Porco, and now he thinks he's here for a rematch. Given all the angry pirates, Porco isn't in any position to say otherwise, so he plays along with the lie, but Curtis has already won, so he asks a good question. Why should he do the rematch? Fio regrettably asks what he wants, and just like Gina observed earlier, he's fallen in love at first sight again and wants to compete for her hand in marriage. Continuing to take charge of the situation, Fio agrees, but if Curtis loses, he'll have to settle Porco's massive debt. Naturally, Porco tries to stop Fio, but the Mama Autos wouldn't let him, and they're so eager for the battle, they even agree to host tomorrow morning. After everyone clears out, Porco is first angry at Fio for making such a risky bet, but then he quickly catches himself and thanks her for saving him and putting so much on the line. Fio's nerves catch up with her, so she goes out for a swim to calm down and then scares Porco half to death whenever she screams. But she's fine. It had just dawned on her that she could have padded those bills and gotten much more money out of Curtis, which gives Porco a hearty and much-needed laugh. That night, Fio wakes to the sound of Porco preparing for his battle to save her from a miserable life with Curtis. As Porco toils with the ammo, she sees something that could be a dream or could be something else. But it looks like Porco was a human once again, but after she calls out to him, he's back to his cursed pig form. She asks why he turned into a pig, and he initially tries to dismiss the question with a short answer that all middle-aged men are pigs. However, Fio knows there's more to it because her dad told her heroic stories from whenever he flew with Porco in the war, back when he was called Marco Rossellini. She then has a silly idea to kiss him like the Princess and the Frog, but he quickly dismisses that idea, and while that seemed to hurt her feelings a little bit, her kind heart and eagerness to help makes Porco regret giving up his humanity. Another difference here is that in English, his real name is Marco Rossellini, but in Japanese, it's Marco Pagot. Pagot is a reference to Nino and Tony Pagot, who created Italy's first animated feature, The Dynamite Brothers, in 1949. Miyazaki had also worked on the Sherlock Hound with their son, Marco Pagot. This is also a good time to point out a second interpretation for the curse, and it's one that I and others kind of generally agree with, and that it's because he's become disillusioned with humanity. Miyazaki's also kind of aligned with this, saying that when a man becomes middle-aged, he becomes a pig, which is a line that the English version has adopted. Fio asks Porco for a story before going to bed, and it's my favorite scene in the movie by a mile. He tells her how he was the best man for Gina's husband, Berlini, and they were out flying on a mission when, out of nowhere, they were in the worst dogfight of their lives. Porco, or Marco at this point, and his unit fought as hard as they could, but soon Marco was all that was left. He flew until he was numb and nearly about to pass out, and then everything went white, and somehow his plane steered itself into a world above the clouds. A world where the sky is endlessly clear and the sea is an endless cloud. Above he saw this white band of light stretching into the distance, and it soon became clear what it was made of as his comrades, including Berlini, started to join the countless other planes in that heartrending yet beautiful light. Of course, he wanted to trade places with his friend, but he couldn't, and whenever he came to, he was alone, skimming just above the sea. Theo thinks all that to mean that God was telling him he wasn't meant to go yet, but Porco thinks it means he deserves to suffer alone as a pig. Theo rightfully points out that can't be because he's a good person, but Porco doubles down with the most chilling line that no, the good guys were the ones that died, and maybe life as a pig is the same thing as hell. Theo tells her that he's a great human, and she's glad he's around before sneaking him that kiss on the cheek after all. He blushes, but alas, remains a pig. Porco's experience of planes in the sky is inspired by Roald Dahl's They Shall Not Grow Old, and its collection of short stories titled Over to You, 10 Stories of Flyers and Flying from 1946. People are crowding in from far and wide to catch the match of the century, Porco versus Curtis. As promised, the boss of the Mamautos is hosting, and he begins things by having the contestants place their bets on chairs. Theo takes her place next to a pile of money, and Curtis says something sleazy that implies something I'm not gonna get into, but he's confident that he's gonna win. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! The deadly battle begins between the rivals, and it appears Curtis has an early advantage whenever he launches the initial volley at Porco, but it turns out the Crimson Pig was playing the long game, making Curtis use up his ammo by being evasive. Porco responds with his signature move called the Loop that gave him his reputation of the ace of the Adriatic, and he maneuvers behind Curtis. The crowd begins to wonder why Porco hasn't used this chance to shoot down Curtis, but as the boss points out to Theo, Porco is honorable and waiting for a moment to only shoot down the engine, not Curtis, kinda like he did to him in the beginning. Naturally, Curtis thinks Porco's gun is jammed, but he's frightened to see that the pig's gun works just fine. As the two battle, Gina is back at her hotel trying to monitor the situation from law enforcement when none other than Ferrari comes through with a message warning her that the Italians are closing in on the race. Hopefully she's not too late to warn them. One last thing from that 1992 interview. Miyazaki said that during his process for making a movie, he doesn't consider what will draw an audiences. He only strives to make a movie that he can be satisfied with, that he finds a proper sense of closure in. And I'm going to read something that I found interesting while we're here. Miyazaki said that he's not a big fan of video games, but he'll sometimes watch his son play and he cheers for the bad guys. Miyamoto said that's the correct way to play games. Then they went on to discuss making movies versus making video games and what making games will eventually be like. 4 years later, Miyamoto changed the video game landscape forever whenever he introduced the world's first 3D Mario game, Super Mario 64. Chef's kiss. Back to the fight. The two pilots are deadlocked in a loop, each desperately trying to outlast the other and line up the finishing shot. Porco can't allow Theo to go with Curtis, so he holds on with all of his might and eventually lines up the perfect shot on Curtis's engine, but his gun jams. And thanks to Theo coming along, he doesn't have a second gun. All hope seems lost when Curtis manages to escape and line up a shot of his own, but miraculously, his gun jammed too. And Curtis may be a lot of things, but he's not a quitter, so he tries to finish the fight by doing some sort of airplane drive-by. Porco laughs it off, calling Curtis a dumb American until his plane is actually shot, so then they devolve into throwing tools at each other midair. Once they run out of stuff to throw at each other, they land to settle this like men, with good old-fashioned fisticuffs, and soon there's a full-on boxing match complete with rounds and a referee. They trade punches and insults round after round as the fight continues until Porco calls Curtis a womanizer. Curtis finds that ironic because, from his point of view, his rival is hogging both Theo and Gina. Porco is naturally confused, but Curtis tells him everything from his talk with Gina in her garden, how she's waiting for him there and how she's in love. Porco is so stunned that he nearly loses the fight, but he hangs on and the two continue battling until they're barely standing. The two simultaneously punch each other, and just as they each go underwater, Gina finally soars in with flares, warning everyone of the Italians. Her pilot expertly lands the seaplane right over the top of where the two fighters are still underwater, and Gina's encouragement gives the Crimson Pig the strength he needs to surface first and win the match. If you look closely during the fight, Porco's glasses are damaged into the shape of a heart. Anywho, the celebrations are short due to the enclosing Italians, but Theo is sure to politely tell everyone, even Curtis, goodbye, and she's given her pile of cash to settle the debt. Then before Theo can get any ideas about being an outlaw with Porco, he scoops her up and tells Gina to take her back to a respectable society while he and Curtis lead the Italians away. Gina thinks it's unfair that her daring Marco always has to be the hero, and Theo is also a bit disappointed to leave, but they both understand and take off nonetheless. As they leave, Fio sneaks another kiss to Porco, and then he and Curtis go back to their planes. Everyone lives happily ever after from there, with Gina and Fio becoming close friends, Fio going on to own her grandpa's business, the pirates frequenting Gina's hotel, and Curtis becoming a movie star after all. On the surface, they keep Gina and Porco's fate secret, but there are two quick but significant details. One, you cannot see Porco's face when he and Curtis leave to steer the Italians away, and Curtis is shocked whenever he saw Porco, which hints that the curse was broken. And for the second detail, as we close the movie, you can see the Crimson Pig's iconic red plane at Gina's, and yes, it's during the day, which means at long last, she settled the bet that she had with herself. There are a few themes that show up in this movie that would reappear later in Ghibli classics that I wanted to cover. First, Porco becomes disillusioned with humanity, so he becomes cursed to be a pig, but he breaks that curse whenever he works to save Fio and leads the army away. Second, Chihiro's parents and Spirited Away become actual pigs, not like anthropomorphic pigs like Porco, whenever they gluttonously eat seemingly abandoned food. And lastly, Sophie in Howl's Moving Castle is cursed to be old, and she remains old as long as she acts that way, but whenever she rises to the occasion and acts like her normal self, she breaks that curse too, just like the Crimson Pig. Alright, that's a wrap on Porco Rosso. Hope you liked it and learned something new. And in my time, I just hit 500 subscribers, so from me to all you guys who are already here, thank you so much. I'm going to keep making videos, and if you want to keep supporting me, like and subscribe, and go ahead and share this video with anyone that you think might like this movie. But that's all I got. Till I catch you next week. Y'all be good. Thanks. Hey, you made it to the end. Remember, if you want to revisit any more of your favorite movies, check the links on screen, but otherwise, subscribe and I'll catch you for a new breakdown next week. Thanks.